She had spent 3 years building walls around herself at work, and he had spent just as long pretending not to notice. But walls don't last forever. The night Nathan Sterling announced he was leaving, Emily Harper felt something inside her chest crack open. Something she had locked away, labeled professional rivalry, and refused to examine too closely. She hadn't expected it to hurt like that. She hadn't expected to care. And she definitely hadn't expected him to look at her the way he did right before he walked out the door. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, and let's begin. The elevator doors opened at the 14th floor at exactly 7:43 in the morning, and Nathan Sterling stepped out carrying a black coffee in one hand and a folder thick enough to double as a weapon in the other. He wore a dark navy suit that fit the way expensive things always fit, like it had been made specifically for his body and his mood. No tie. Top button undone. The kind of deliberate carelessness that took money to pull off convincingly. Nobody on the 14th floor knew he was worth over $2 billion. That was the point. Sterling Venture Capital occupied a glass tower 4 blocks east, where financial analysts worked long hours under fluorescent lighting and whispered his name like a password. His picture had appeared twice on the cover of Forbes, once with the headline, "The Quiet Billionaire, How Nathan Sterling Built an Empire by Disappearing." The disappearing part was this: Meridian Consulting, a mid-sized firm that handled strategic planning for a rotating list of mid-market clients. Nathan had purchased a quiet stake in Meridian 3 years ago, and instead of taking a board seat in a corner office, he'd done something that baffled everyone who heard about it. He'd taken a director-level role, same floor as everyone else, same coffee machine, same Monday morning all-hands meetings where someone always brought the wrong pastries. His reasons were his own. His assistant at Sterling VC, a sharp woman named Claudia, who had worked for him for 6 years, had simply stopped questioning his decisions somewhere around year 2. He needs somewhere to think, she'd told a colleague once, somewhere people don't treat him like a symbol. What she meant, though she'd never say it directly, was that Nathan Sterling had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily who needed her father to be a human being occasionally, not a headline. At Meridian, he was Nathan, director of strategic development, decent in meetings, ruthless with numbers, allergic to small talk. He walked to his office, set his coffee down, and opened his laptop. 2 minutes later, he heard her. Us. You could always hear Emily Harper before you saw her. Not because she was loud, though she could be when the situation called for it, but because she moved through the office with a particular kind of energy that disrupted the air. Her heels hit the floor with purpose. Her voice, even in ordinary conversation, carried the subtle undertone of someone who had learned long ago that the world would not quiet down for her, so she'd simply learned to be louder than the noise. She was on a phone call when she passed Nathan's open doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a twist that was already starting to come loose on one side, a laptop bag over her shoulder, and a stack of printed reports wedged under her arm. "No, Marcus, that's not what I said," she was saying, her voice sharp and flat at the same time. "I said the projections were optimistic. There's a difference between optimistic and fictional, and the Hargrove deck is currently somewhere in the fictional category, so I need you to pull the Q3 actuals and—" She paused in the doorway. Nathan didn't look up from his laptop. "And I'll call you back in 5 minutes, she finished, hanging up. She stared at his office for a moment, specifically at the open folder on his desk, which she could read upside down from 4 feet away. "That's the Hargrove file," she said. "Good morning to you too, Harper." "Why do you have the Hargrove file?" "That account was assigned to my team." He finally looked up. "And your team submitted a deck with a 17% revenue growth projection for a company that lost 2 distribution partners in the last quarter." "So yes, it landed on my desk." Her jaw tightened slightly. "We're accounting for the new retail contracts, which haven't been signed yet." "Which will be signed." Optimism isn't a financial model. She stared at him for a long moment, the kind of stare that other people in the office had learned to step back from. Then she shifted the stack of reports under her arm, walked into his office without being invited, and set them down on the corner of his desk. "The Callaway contracts get signed by the 15th, she said. "I have it confirmed from 3 separate contacts on their end. The moment those numbers are real, our model holds. You can flag the deck if you want, but flag it as pending confirmation, not as incorrect." Nathan looked at the report she'd set down. Then he looked at her. "Pending confirmation," he said. "Yes. That's still not a number." "No, but it's the truth, which is slightly better than a number in this case." He was quiet for a second. Then he picked up one of the reports, scanned the first page, and said nothing else. Emily read that as agreement, or close enough, and left. He watched her go and then looked back at his laptop. 17%, he thought. She might actually be right. He hated that. Emily Harper had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of Columbus, Ohio, that real estate listings described as transitional and residents described as rough. Her mother had worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility for most of Emily's childhood, and her father had been the kind of man who showed up for birthdays about half the time and everything else even less. There had been a younger brother, a cousin who cycled in and out of trouble, and a grandmother who kept a small vegetable garden on the fire escape and made soup every Sunday that smelled like the one warm thing in the building. Emily had been the kid who stayed up late with a flashlight reading every book she could borrow, steal, or buy secondhand. Not because she particularly loved literature, though she did, but because books were the only things she'd found that reliably led somewhere better than where she was. She had gotten into Ohio State on a combination of academic scholarships and sheer stubborn will, working part-time through all 4 years. She had graduated in the top 8% of her class in business administration, finished an MBA at Northwestern by 26, and taken a junior analyst role at Meridian that most people in her cohort would have considered beneath their degree. She hadn't cared. She needed a foothold, and she'd taken it. By 30, she was one of the firm's top-performing senior associates, known for her client instincts, her relentless preparation, and her absolute intolerance for laziness dressed up as strategy. She also had a tendency to argue. Her direct supervisor, a tired but perceptive man named Gerald Whitmore, had once written in her annual review, "Emily's greatest professional asset and her most significant interpersonal liability is the same quality. She is almost always right, and she cannot stop herself from saying so." Emily had read that, thought about it for 3 days, and concluded that Gerald was correct, but that the correct response was simply to be right more efficiently. She had never quite mastered the efficiency part, which brought her, reliably, back to Nathan Sterling. Their first real argument had happened 6 weeks after he joined Meridian, in a conference room on the 4th floor during a quarterly strategy review. Nathan had been reviewing the firm's client retention rates and had suggested restructuring 2 accounts. Emily had been in the room, representing her team. "The issue isn't structure," she'd said, cutting across his presentation. "The issue is that we've been running those accounts reactively for 18 months. The clients aren't confused by our model, they're bored by it. You can restructure the boxes on an org chart, and nothing changes if the actual engagement doesn't change." The room had gone quiet in a specific way, the particular silence of people who weren't sure whether to be impressed or alarmed. Nathan had turned to look at her. "You have an alternative?" "Yes. Give me the Palmer account. 90 days. I'll show you what proactive engagement looks like." That account has been handled by the Henderson team for 2 years. And the Henderson team is going to lose it in 6 months. I've read the correspondence. The client is restless. Another silence. "That's a significant claim to make about a colleague's work," Nathan said. "I know. It's also accurate." He had studied her for a moment, the steadiness in her eyes, the slight lift of her chin, the way she was clearly prepared to defend every word she'd just said. And then he turned back to the room and said, "Give her the Palmer account." Gerald had told her afterward that she was either very brave or very reckless. Emily had said she'd let the results speak for themselves. 4 months later, the Palmer account had renewed at a higher contract value than it had ever seen. Nathan had sent her a 1-line email. "Good work on Palmer." She had stared at it for 10 minutes, unsure whether she was annoyed or pleased. She'd been both. The thing about working near someone you can't stop noticing is that you develop elaborate systems to pretend you haven't noticed. Emily's system involved being preemptively critical. If she walked into a meeting and Nathan was already seated, she would scan whatever was on the table in front of him and identify, before sitting down, at least 2 things she disagreed with. This kept her focused on the work rather than on the way he held his pen, or the particular silence he maintained when he was actually listening versus the silence he maintained when he was waiting for you to finish. Nathan's system involved being preemptively busy. If Emily was in a meeting, he read the reports. If she was presenting, he took notes. If she said something he found genuinely sharp, he wrote it down and didn't respond immediately, giving himself the buffer of task completion between the things she'd said and whatever his face might have done. Neither of them would have described these systems as systems. They would have said they were simply focused professionals who happened to be in frequent professional disagreement. Their colleagues had a different interpretation. They're either going to end up together, or one of them is going to get the other fired. said Priya Anand, a project manager who sat close enough to both of them to have developed strong opinions on the matter. She said this to Marcus, the analyst who handled the Hargrove account, on a Thursday afternoon in the break room. Marcus looked up from his yogurt. I give it 50-50. The relationship or the firing? Both. The Tuesday morning meetings were the worst, or the best, depending on your perspective. Every Tuesday at 9, the senior team gathered in the main conference room to review the week's priorities, flag problems, and argue about resource allocation. It was the kind of meeting that ran exactly 45 minutes in theory and 90 minutes in practice, because there was always something that needed to be contested. Nathan ran the meetings. Emily sat 3 seats to his left. The dynamic had become something the rest of the room quietly worked around. Nathan would lay out a plan or a recommendation. Emily would interrogate it. Nathan would push back. Emily would push harder. And somewhere in the friction between them, the actual useful shape of whatever they were discussing would emerge. Colleagues had started keeping a private tally. Whitmore had been heard to say, after one particularly productive Tuesday session, that the two of them together did the analytical work of 4 separate people. What he'd meant was that they made each other better. Neither of them had heard him say it. Or maybe they had, and they just hadn't known what to do with it. On a Wednesday in October, 3 months into what would become the year that changed everything, Nathan arrived at work to find a sticky note on his office door frame. The Callaway contracts came through, model holds. EH, no exclamation point. No, I told you so. Just the fact, delivered clean. He pulled the note off the door frame and set it on the corner of his desk, next to his keyboard. He didn't throw it away. He wasn't entirely sure why. Emily knew his coffee order. She hadn't intended to learn it. It had happened the way most inconvenient knowledge happens, gradually, then all at once. She'd been at the coffee cart on the 2nd floor one morning when the barista had called out an order, dark roast, oat milk, 2 shots, no sugar, and Nathan had reached past her shoulder to take it, and she had simply filed it away. After that, she'd noticed. Every morning, same order, same time, give or take 10 minutes. There was a Wednesday in November when the usual coffee cart was being serviced and the replacement machine on the 4th floor was broken, and Nathan had walked into the 9 o'clock meeting looking like a man who had already been awake for 17 hours. Emily had arrived at the meeting with 2 cups, her usual, and a dark roast from the cafe across the street that she set at the empty chair without comment. He'd looked at it, then looked at her. She was already reading something on her laptop. You were going to be insufferable if you didn't have caffeine, she said, without looking up. He picked up the cup. Thank you. It was self-preservation. It was not self-preservation. Nathan noticed things too, though he was quieter about it. He noticed that Emily always read the room before she walked into it. A pause at the doorway, 2 seconds, a scan. He'd clocked it early and initially written it off as professional habit. Later, he'd realized it was something else, something older. The reflex of someone who had spent years in rooms where she didn't know whether she'd be welcomed. He noticed that she stayed late on the nights before big client presentations. Not because she was unprepared, but because she needed the silence. That she kept a photograph tucked into the side pocket of her laptop bag that she never put on her desk. That when she was genuinely worried about something, she didn't get louder. She got very quiet in a specific way that the rest of the office usually misread as confidence. He noticed that 3 different times in 3 different meetings, she had redirected a client's criticism away from a junior team member and absorbed it herself, never once mentioning it afterward. He noticed that she was better than this office. He didn't say that. He had no idea what he would have done if he had. There was a Thursday afternoon in late November when Emily was running a client call in the small glass-walled conference room near the east side of the floor. Nathan was walking past, heading back from a meeting of his own, when he caught the shift in her posture through the glass. She was mid-sentence, but her voice had dropped, and her jaw had tightened. He recognized the client, Feldman Group, a difficult account with a demanding principal named Robert Feldman, who had a habit of speaking over women in calls as though the words they'd just said had arrived in the room from somewhere else. Nathan stopped walking. He could have kept going. It wasn't his account. Emily was more than capable, but he stopped and he waited. A minute later, he saw Emily's hand move to her notepad, and he could read the body language clearly. She was being interrupted, not for the first time, based on the particular set of her shoulders. He knocked on the glass door, opened it, and leaned in. Sorry to interrupt, he said pleasantly, directing his voice toward the phone speaker. Robert, this is Nathan Sterling. We've spoken before at the Henderson Review. I just wanted to flag that Emily's been leading an impressive overhaul of your account metrics this quarter, and I wanted to make sure we're aligned on the updated projections before end of month. Emily, do you want me to pull up the comparison charts? There was a half-second pause on the line, then Robert Feldman's voice. Nathan, good to hear you. Yes, let's take a look. Emily looked at Nathan. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, opening his laptop. They ran the rest of the call together. Afterward, when Feldman had hung up and Nathan was closing his laptop, Emily said, I had it. I know. Then why? Because Feldman respects titles, and using mine to get him to actually listen to what you were already saying is not the same as rescuing you. He paused. You were right about the Q4 projections, by the way. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. It was the most uncomplicated thing they'd ever said to each other. On the nights when Nathan left Meridian at a reasonable hour, which was, statistically, less than half the nights, he picked up Lily from his mother's brownstone on Crestview, and they drove home through whatever traffic the city had decided to serve up that evening. Lily was 7 years old and had already developed the habit of narrating everything. A man on the street had a snake today, she reported on one particular Tuesday evening. A real one. It was around his neck. Mr. Peters said that's irresponsible, but I think the snake looked happy. How do you tell if a snake looks happy? It was relaxed, you can tell. Nathan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She had her mother's eyes, large and steady and capable of landing on you with a weight that was slightly disarming in a second grader. He thought about that sometimes, the weight of certain eyes. Dad, are you listening? I'm listening. You're doing the thing where you're listening but also thinking about something else. He was. He'd been doing it more lately. Tell me about the snake, he said. She told him about the snake. He drove. The city moved around them in the particular way cities do at dusk when the light turns amber and everything looks briefly like it was designed by someone who cared. Lily fell asleep in the back seat before they reached home, and Nathan sat in the parked car for a few minutes after killing the engine, in the specific quiet that only exists in a car with a sleeping child, and thought about what he was doing. He had been thinking about what he was doing for most of the last year. He had built his company in the years immediately following his divorce, a period he looked back on now with a mixture of pride and something he couldn't fully name. Not regret, exactly. More like the feeling of someone looking at a photograph of themselves and recognizing the face, but not quite recognizing the expression. He had worked because work was the one place where the pain had a shape he could control. Every deal closed was a grief managed. Every company he'd taken from struggling to solvent had been a proof of something he needed to prove. Sterling VC had become what it was partly because of his talent and partly because of his willingness to sacrifice almost everything else in its service. It was only when Lily was 4 years old and had asked, during one of his rare early evenings home, why he smelled like his phone, meaning the particular scent of electronics and office air that apparently clung to him, that he had understood something needed to change. He'd taken the Meridian role 6 months later, not as a retreat exactly, more like a course correction, a way to stay connected to actual work, strategy, relationships, problems with human dimensions, without disappearing entirely into the machinery of wealth. And it had worked. Mostly. The problem was that the course correction had introduced a new variable. The variable was 5'6", had an argument for everything, kept showing up in his thoughts at inconvenient hours, and had absolutely no idea who he really was, which was, he recognized, both the appeal and the problem. December arrived with the particular brutality of a Chicago winter, wind that found every gap in your coat, skies the color of old pewter, and a general municipal agreement to survive through the use of coffee and denial. The promotion announcement was coming. Everyone knew it. Gerald Whitmore had been quietly circling both Emily and Nathan for months, and the senior vice president of operations role that Randall Yates was vacating in January was, by consensus, going to one of them. The betting, internally, was roughly split. Nathan was the obvious structural choice. He had seniority, a management record, and the kind of quiet authority that made executives comfortable. Emily was the emotional favorite. She was brilliant, her track record was exceptional, and the people who worked under her would have walked through walls for her if she'd asked. Priya had set up an informal spreadsheet. Emily knew about the spreadsheet. She'd pretended not to. Nathan knew about the spreadsheet. He'd never checked it. The thing neither of them knew. The thing that only existed in the space between them that neither had learned to read yet was that the promotion had quietly stopped mattering to Nathan sometime around October. He couldn't have told you the exact date. There was no single moment. There was just a slow shift in weight, like a building settling, where the thing that had once felt central had moved to the periphery and something else had taken the center without asking permission. He had noticed it during a Tuesday meeting when Emily had dismantled a client proposal with 4 specific objections, all of them correct. And he'd sat there watching her work and thought, I don't care who gets this promotion. And then, more honestly, I hope she does. And then most honestly, what am I actually doing here? There was an evening in early December when they both ended up in the break room at the same time, both reaching for the coffee machine at approximately 8:15 p.m. on a Friday when most of the floor had emptied out. You're still here, Emily said. So are you. She poured her coffee. He poured his. They stood in the narrow kitchen in the particular silence of 2 people who have exhausted their usual modes of engagement and are sitting in what's left. Priya thinks you're going to get the SVP role, Emily said. Priya thinks a lot of things. She's usually right. Nathan leaned against the counter. Do you want it? She looked at him sideways. What kind of question is that? A direct one. She considered this. Yes, but not because of the title, because of what it would mean. Where I started and where this would put me. She paused. You probably can't understand that. Why not? She gave him a look that said several things at once without committing to any of them. Because you're... She started. What? Comfortable, she finally said. You've always been comfortable. You don't know what it's like to need something the way some people need things. He said nothing for a moment. You have no idea, he thought. But what he said was, you're probably right. And she took her coffee and left. And he stood in the empty break room a minute longer and thought about what it would mean to tell her the truth. He didn't have an answer for that yet. The Friday before everything changed was, on its surface, a perfectly ordinary day. Emily presented to the Caldwell group in the morning and knocked it out so completely that the client lead actually said, audibly, I feel like we've been leaving money on the table for 2 years, which was both a compliment and a minor crisis that Emily handled with the particular grace of someone who was used to turning problems into plans in real time. Nathan spent the morning on calls. 2 with Sterling VC matters he managed quietly from his cell phone on the terrace. 1 with his accountant, 1 with Lily's school about a science project that had apparently gone moderately wrong in a way that required parental discussion. In the afternoon, they were both in a project review meeting on opposite sides of the table, going through the Q1 forecast for a mid-sized logistics company called Vance Transport. It was routine, standard, except that at one point Nathan said something about hedging capital deployment timelines, and Emily said, That's actually right, in a tone that suggested it surprised her, and Nathan looked up from his report, and they looked at each other for a moment that was approximately 2 seconds longer than professional courtesy required. Priya, seated at the far end of the table, wrote something in her notebook. After the meeting, Emily went back to her desk and spent 20 minutes staring at a spreadsheet without absorbing a single cell of it. Nathan called his assistant at Sterling VC and told her he needed to move up the timeline on a decision he'd been postponing for 3 months. Neither of them knew it was the last ordinary day. Neither of them knew what was coming the following Monday. But the city knew, maybe. Or the season did. There was a shift in the air that Friday evening as Emily walked to the parking garage, a sharpness that had nothing to do with December wind. She stopped on the sidewalk for a moment, for no reason she could name, looked back at the building. Then she turned and kept walking. The Monday after the last ordinary Friday arrived the way bad weeks always do, quietly, without warning, dressed up as routine. Emily got in at 7:51, which was 9 minutes later than she preferred. The weekend had chewed through her in ways she couldn't fully account for. She'd spent Saturday on client work she hadn't needed to do, Sunday reorganizing a closet that hadn't needed reorganizing, and both evenings trying not to think about a meeting that wasn't scheduled yet, and a promotion she told herself she was focused on, and a man she told herself she was not thinking about. She was, by her own internal accounting, failing at approximately 2 of those 3 things. She dropped her bag at her desk, pulled up her email, and spent the first 20 minutes of the morning doing what she always did when she needed to feel grounded. Sorting, prioritizing, triaging, turning the noise into a list. Lists were something she trusted. Lists didn't have subtext. Lists didn't look at you 2 seconds longer than necessary during project reviews. Nathan's office, she noticed without intending to, was empty. He arrived at 8:20, which was late for him. He came through the elevator looking like a man who had made a decision overnight and was still feeling the weight of it. Not visibly disheveled, not distracted in any obvious way, but carrying something. Emily recognized the quality of it because she'd seen it in herself, in mirrors, on the mornings when she'd resolved something difficult and hadn't yet figured out how to live with the resolution. She watched him for approximately 3 seconds. Then she looked back at her screen. Nathan went into his office, closed the door, which he almost never did, and spent the first hour of the morning on his phone. Claudia, his assistant at Sterling VC, had cleared a specific block of his calendar at 9 a.m. He used it to confirm, for the second time in 72 hours, the decision he'd been circling for months. The new role, an advisory position at a private equity firm called Harlow Partners, one with the kind of structural flexibility that would let him prioritize differently, had been on the table since September. He had delayed and told himself he was being thorough, being responsible, thinking it through. He had been, more accurately, waiting to see if the reason he was hesitating would resolve itself. It hadn't resolved. It had gotten more complicated, which was, he knew, its own kind of answer. By 10 o'clock, he had confirmed the offer. Start date, the 1st of February. Notice, 2 weeks, effective the following Monday. He sat at his desk after the call and looked at the sticky note still sitting at the corner near his keyboard. The Callaway contracts came through. Model holds. EH. And thought about what he was going to say. How to say it. When. He hadn't figured that out yet when Emily knocked on his open door at 10:15 with a folder and an expression that meant she had thoughts about something and had given herself exactly this much time to deliver them. The Vance Transport Q1 deck needs another pass, she said, setting the folder on his desk. The cost reduction assumptions on page 11 are built on a vendor quote that expires in 3 weeks. If they don't sign before the quote lapses, the whole middle section of the projection breaks down. Nathan looked at the folder, then at her. Good catch. She blinked. She had been prepared clearly for at least a modest disagreement. That's it? That's it. Fix it. She studied him for a moment with the look she used when she suspected she was missing information. Are you all right? Fine. Why? You closed your door this morning. People close doors, Harper. You don't, she said. Not unkindly, just factual, the way she delivered most things. You close your door when you're on a call you don't want overheard. You were on that call for 40 minutes. Nathan said nothing. I'm not asking, she added quickly. I just, you seem like something's happening. Something is always happening. She picked the folder back up, stood there another second, then nodded once, in the short, pragmatic way that meant, fine, I'll let it go, and left. He watched the empty doorway after she'd gone. Tell her, said some part of him. Not yet, said the rest. He wasn't sure which voice was winning. The week moved the way weeks do when a secret is sitting in the middle of them, slightly off its axis, every ordinary exchange carrying a small extra weight. Nathan attended the Tuesday meeting and ran it the same as always, and Emily sat 3 seats to his left and argued about the resource allocation for the Brennan account with the same precision she always brought, and the room functioned exactly as it had functioned for the last 2 years. But he was watching the clock in a way he hadn't before, counting something he couldn't name. Emily, for her part, had decided she was imagining things. This was a periodic decision she made about Nathan Sterling, a deliberate act of self-correction when she caught herself paying too close attention to the particular frequency of his silences, or the way a comment he made in a meeting would stay with her longer than comments from anyone else in the room. She would notice, and then she would make the decision. You are imagining things. This is a professional relationship. He is your rival and your equal, and occasionally your ally in a room full of people who are neither, and that is all it is. The decision worked, roughly, for 4 to 5 days at a stretch. Then something would happen. A moment, a look, a Thursday afternoon in a conference room when he'd sat down beside her and taken Feldman's call with her, and afterwards said you were right about the projections with that specific quality of directness that he reserved for things he actually meant, and the decision would need to be made again. She was currently about 3 days into a fresh decision cycle, which should have given her at least 2 more days of functional professional distance. Instead, on Wednesday evening, something happened that reset the whole clock. She had stayed late, but not unusual, working through the revised Vance deck with Marcus, who was talented but slow, which meant the session had stretched from 6 to nearly 8. When Marcus finally packed up and left, Emily sat back in her chair in the empty conference room, closed her eyes for 10 seconds, and let herself be tired. Not the performance of tiredness she sometimes allowed herself around people she trusted, but the real version, the one that sat behind her sternum and pulled. She was the only one who knew what this job cost her. Not just the hours, though the hours were real. The accumulation of it. The constant calculation of how to be taken seriously without being dismissed as aggressive. How to be warm enough to be liked without being soft enough to be overlooked. How to walk into every room knowing she had earned her place there and still feeling, on the bad days, like she was one wrong step from the whole thing collapsing. She had never once said any of this out loud at work. She had said pieces of it to her friend Jasmine over wine on Saturday nights when her guard was down. She had said none of it to anyone at Meridian. She opened her eyes, started packing up. The floor was quiet, most of the overheads on automatic dimming, the city doing its nighttime thing through the tall windows. She pulled on her coat, picked up her bag, and walked toward the elevator. Nathan was in the kitchen. He was at the counter, not doing anything particular, just standing there with a mug of something, looking at his phone with the expression of a man who was thinking through a problem that had nothing to do with whatever was on the screen. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "You're still here," she said. It was the same line from last Friday, and they both recognized it. "Still here," he confirmed. She almost kept walking. Then she didn't. She set her bag down on the small table by the wall and opened the cabinet for a mug, because she had been cold for 3 hours, and the night was long, and sometimes you just needed the 4 minutes it took to make tea before you could face the drive home. They were quiet while the kettle ran. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was the particular quiet of two people who have argued with each other enough that silence has stopped being awkward and started being something else. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said. "You usually do." She looked at him sideways. "Why did you take this job?" He was still. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Meridian." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "This is a good firm. It's not a great firm. You're smart enough and connected enough to be somewhere significantly more prestigious, so why here?" Nathan considered several answers. He gave her the one that was true, though not the whole truth. "I needed somewhere I could actually work, without the circumstances getting in the way." "What circumstances?" "The kind that come with certain levels of visibility." She looked at him, studied him the way she studied proposals when she was trying to find the assumption nobody had named yet. "You're more than a director." It wasn't a question. It was the specific tone she used when she had already connected most of the dots and was giving you the courtesy of confirming it yourself. He met her eyes. "What makes you say that?" "Feldman," she said. "When you said your name on that call, he recognized it immediately. And Robert Feldman doesn't spend time on people who aren't worth spending time on. He was recalibrating in real time." She paused. "And there's the thing where you clearly don't care about the SVP role the way someone at your level should care about it. Maybe I'm not competitive." She almost laughed. "Nathan, you are, without question, one of the most competitive people I have ever met. You care intensely about being correct. You care intensely about outcomes. You do not care at all about the title that comes with this promotion, and that is strange for someone who doesn't have something better waiting." The kettle clicked. She poured. The silence between them had shifted into something neither of them was entirely managing. "There are things I haven't told you," he said. "I know." She picked up her mug. "You don't have to." "Emily, it's fine." She said it without sharpness. "We work together. You don't owe me your full history. I was just curious." She paused. "You have a daughter." "Lily. She's 7. She nodded. "I've heard you on the phone with her. You sound like a different person." "How so?" She thought about it. "Less defended," she said finally. "Like someone who decided with one specific person to stop winning and just be present." He was quiet for a long moment. "She's the reason I'm here," he said. Not explaining the job, explaining everything. The choice, the scale back, the deliberate smallness of Meridian compared to what he'd built. She needs her father to be a person, not a business. Something in Emily's expression shifted. Not softened, exactly. She wasn't a person who softened easily, but something adjusted behind her eyes. Some piece of the picture she'd been carrying rearranged itself. "She's lucky," Emily said. "She'd probably disagree on the days I'm late to pick up." A small, unexpected smile crossed Emily's face. It was brief, She caught it, contained it, but he saw it. "I should go," she said. "Yeah." She picked up her bag, walked to the doorway, paused. "For what it's worth," she said, not turning around, "whatever it is you're not telling me, I don't think it changes anything I've already figured out about you." She left before he could ask what she meant. He stood in the empty kitchen for a long time after that, and the city sat outside the windows doing nothing useful about any of it. The week ended without the announcement, without the declaration he owed the office, the one that would shift the architecture of everything once it was said. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, which was partially true and partially an excuse to have a few more days of before they knew, before it changed, before the thing that had been building quietly between them for a year had to contend with the reality of him leaving. On Friday afternoon, he drafted an email to Gerald Whitmore. He read it 3 times. He changed 2 sentences. He sent it. Effective the following Monday, he would be serving 2 weeks' notice. Gerald's reply came in 11 minutes. "Come by my office Monday morning. We should talk." Nathan closed the email, looked out the window. Across the floor, through the glass partition that separated the open workspace from his office, he could see Emily at her desk. She was on a call, one hand moving slightly as she talked, the way she did when she was working through a problem in real time. Her hair was down today. She wore it up most of the week, but Fridays it was usually down by mid-afternoon, like some concession she allowed herself at the end of the week. He noticed this without meaning to. He always noticed. She looked up and caught him looking. He looked back at his screen. She finished her call, glanced at his office again. He was reading something, or pretending to. She told herself to stop watching and went back to her own work. The distance between them was maybe 40 feet of office floor. It had never felt smaller. The weekend that followed was the last one before everything changed, though neither of them knew that on Friday night. Emily went to dinner with Jasmine, who was perceptive in the specific way of longtime friends, meaning she watched Emily deflect 3 questions about work before she said plainly, "Who is he?" "That is not what's happening," Emily said. "Who is he?" Jasmine repeated. Emily drank her wine. "There is no story here." "There is a story," Jasmine said, with absolute conviction. "The story is written all over your face right now, which is especially impressive because you have one of the most controlled faces I have ever seen on a living human being." "He's a colleague." "Does he know he's only a colleague?" Emily did not answer that. Jasmine gave her the look, the one that had been weaponized over 12 years of friendship, and said, "You know what your problem is?" "I'm sure you're going to tell me." "Your problem is that you are so good at protecting yourself that sometimes you protect yourself from the wrong things." She picked up her glass. "Not everything that can hurt you will. Some things are just real, and they're worth the risk." Emily looked at the table. "I've worked too hard for this promotion to get distracted now." Those 2 things are not mutually exclusive. In my experience, they are. Jasmine was quiet for a moment. Then, "In whose experience? Yours? Because your track record on this specific subject is, respectfully, not great, Em." Emily didn't argue with that. She ate her food and deflected the conversation toward Jasmine's own life, which was rich enough in ongoing drama to sustain them through the rest of the evening without circling back. But driving home, she thought about what Jasmine had said, about protecting yourself from the wrong things, about worth the risk. She thought about a kitchen at 8 in the evening and a man who looked like someone carrying a decision. She thought, if he was leaving, he would have said so. She thought, he'll say something when there's something to say. She thought, you have a promotion to focus on. Focus. She parked in front of her building, sat in the car for a moment. "There are things I haven't told you," he had said. She had said it was fine. She wasn't entirely sure that was true. The following Monday, Emily arrived at 7:42, 9 minutes early, 1 minute better than last week, which was the kind of small personal victories she collected without admitting she collected them. She made her coffee, cleared her overnight emails, and was settling into the first block of focused work when she noticed Gerald Whitmore's office light was on and Nathan was in there. The door was closed. She stared at this for approximately 4 seconds and then looked deliberately away. 20 minutes later, Nathan came back to his own office. His face was the same as always, composed, unreadable to most people, and to Emily only slightly less unreadable than usual. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing something. Priya came by Emily's desk at 10, carrying a coffee and a look. "You know something's happening, right?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Gerald's been on the phone since 9. HR got an alert. I have a contact in HR, don't ask. And Nathan's been, I don't know, quieter. Nathan is always quiet. Differently quiet. Emily looked up from her screen. She made herself sound bored. Priya, I have 4 deliverables before noon. Priya retreated. Emily stared at her screen. The promotion review was scheduled for Thursday. She knew this. Whitmore had confirmed it in a brief email the previous week. Formal discussion this Thursday. Please keep the afternoon clear. She had been building toward Thursday for months. Everything she had done, every late night, every client she'd turned around, every argument she'd won on the merits, it had all been threading toward this specific week. She was not going to lose the thread now. She put her head down and worked. Tuesday passed. Wednesday passed. Nathan was in every meeting, running them with his usual precision, and Emily interrogated everything he presented with her usual rigor, and the room functioned the way it always had, and if there was something different in the specific quality of his attention when she spoke, something that felt to her like someone memorizing rather than simply listening, she told herself she was inventing it. She was possibly inventing it. She was possibly not. On Wednesday evening, she worked until 7, then packed up and rode the elevator down alone and stood outside the building in the December cold for a moment before pulling on her gloves. The city was loud in the way Chicago gets in winter, muffled and sharp at the same time, the sound bouncing differently off cold air and hard surfaces. Her breath came out visible. She watched it disappear. Thursday, she thought. Focus on Thursday. She walked to her car. 2 floors up, Nathan was still at his desk, and he was looking at a document that had nothing to do with Meridian. It was a forwarded email from Claudia outlining the transition details for his role at Harlow Partners. He had read it 3 times. He had responded with 3 brief confirmations. He closed the email, opened a new one, addressed it to no one, and typed nothing. Then he closed that too. He had been trying for a week to figure out the right way to handle the announcement, not the official one, that was already in Gerald's hands, already processed through HR, already in the machinery of the company. The other one. The conversation that wasn't an official announcement, the one that lived somewhere between professional and personal, the one he owed to a specific person before the news hit the floor, in whatever form office news always hit floors. He owed her that. He knew he did. He just didn't know what came after it. And that more than anything else was what had kept him quiet for 10 days. Not fear of the announcement itself, but fear of standing on the other side of it with no remaining professional structure between them and no idea what he was allowed to say. He turned off his desk lamp, gathered his coat. Thursday was 1 day away. He had run out of time to figure out the after. He was going to have to say the thing and find out. The Thursday review was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Emily spent the morning in a state of focused calm that cost her more than it looked like. She had a 9 o'clock client call that went well, a brief hallway exchange with Marcus about a deadline, and a cup of coffee that she drank standing up at her desk because sitting felt too much like waiting and she refused to wait. At 1:15, she went to the restroom, looked at herself in the mirror, and said, quietly and without drama, "You have earned this." Then she went back to her desk and worked until Gerald's assistant appeared at 1:50 and said Mr. Whitmore was ready. She walked into Gerald's office, sat down. Gerald was behind his desk with his reading glasses on, and he had the expression he wore when he was about to deliver something complicated. "Emily," he said, "thank you for making time." Of course. She kept her hands in her lap. Still. I want to start by saying that the review committee's assessment of your performance has been outstanding, genuinely. The Palmer account, the Caldwell work, the Brennan turnaround, all of it is in the record. Something moved through her. Not relief. It was too early for relief, but something close. The specific feeling of being seen accurately. It meant more than she ever let on that it meant. "Thank you," she said. "We're moving forward with the SVP promotion," Gerald continued, "and I want to offer it to you formally today." She was quiet for a moment. "Effective January 15th, he said. "Full transition to the leadership role, expanded team, the accounts we discussed." She breathed. "Yes," she said. "Simple. Straightforward." The word she had been building toward for years, and when it finally came out, it came out plain and clear and without performance. Gerald smiled in the particular way of a man who has been in this industry long enough to know what moments like this mean for people who've worked like Emily Harper had worked. "There's one more thing," he said, and his tone shifted slightly. "Nathan Sterling has tendered his resignation. He'll be leaving the firm at the end of next week. The room didn't change. The office didn't change. Emily didn't visibly change. But something in the center of her chest did something she hadn't expected. A sudden contraction, like a hand closing around something. She kept her face level. "I see," she said. "He's moving to a new role. The timing is coincidental with the promotion decision. He made his decision independently." Gerald looked at her with the mild perceptiveness of a man who had watched these two people in rooms together for 2 years. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the general announcement." "Thank you," she said. She shook his hand, walked out of the office. She made it to the hallway, turned the corner, and stood very still against the wall for approximately 15 seconds. Not crying. She wasn't going to cry in the office. Not about this, not about him, just processing the specific collision of the two things. The thing she'd wanted for 3 years, finally confirmed, and the thing she hadn't admitted she needed, also confirmed, but in the wrong direction. He's leaving. She straightened up, adjusted the strap of her bag. Of course he is. She walked back to her desk, sat down. The afternoon moved around her. Nathan, 3 hours later, sent a brief email to the full team. Standard language. He was moving on. Grateful for the work. Best wishes to everyone. Effective end of next week. Professional, clean. The kind of email people wrote when they were trying to make something feel smaller than it was. Emily read it twice. She did not respond. She went home, stood in her apartment in her coat for a few minutes without turning the lights on. The city did its thing outside the window. Jasmine texted, "How'd Thursday go?" Emily typed, "Got the promotion." Jasmine, "Call me." Emily, "Tomorrow. I'm tired." She set her phone down, sat on the edge of the couch. She had the promotion. She had what she'd worked for. And Nathan Sterling was leaving in 9 days. And she had never told him a single true thing about how she felt. And she had planned, somewhere in the complicated private math of the last few months, to say something after the promotion was decided, after the professional question was settled, after she could stand on ground that was entirely her own and say it without it looking like strategy or deflection or fear. She had thought they had more time. She had been wrong. She looked at her phone, put it face down on the cushion beside her. Outside, Chicago went on being Chicago, relentless and cold and enormous, and Emily Harper sat in her apartment in the dark and held in both hands the twin weight of having everything she'd fought for and the sudden inconvenient certainty that she had also almost let something else go entirely. Almost. The word sat there. She picked up her phone. She picked up the phone, set it back down, picked it up again. She did not call Jasmine. She did not call anyone. She sat on the edge of her couch in the dark with her coat still on and her phone in her hand, and she made herself be honest. The real kind of honest. The kind you can only manage alone at night when there's nothing left to perform for. About what she was actually feeling. The promotion was real. It was hers. 3 years of work, of grinding, of being the person who stayed late and took the difficult clients and argued every point until it was right, and it had finally resolved into something concrete. That was real. And it was good. And she had earned every syllable of it. And Nathan Sterling was leaving in 9 days, and she had spent a year and a half pretending not to care about that specific person in the specific way that she cared about him, and the pretending had made sense when it was protecting something, her focus, her professionalism, her forward momentum. But now she was sitting in the dark, holding her phone and asking herself what, exactly, she was still protecting. The answer came back quiet and inconvenient. Nothing. She was protecting nothing. The promotion was decided. The professional question was resolved. The structure she had used as an excuse to keep the feelings at arm's length had done its job and retired. And what was left was just the feeling, unhoused, taking up space in her chest and not going anywhere. She turned the lights on, made herself a cup of tea she didn't finish, went to bed. She lay in the dark for an hour before she slept. And in that hour, she thought about a man who had walked into a conference room 2 years ago and told her she was wrong about something. And she had told him right back that he was wrong, and neither of them had been entirely right or entirely wrong, and somehow from that friction something had been building that she had called rivalry, and he had called rivalry, and both of them had been lying. She knew it. She had known it for months. The question was what she was going to do about 9 days? Friday at Meridian had the particular charged quality of a room where a secret has been released into the air, and everyone is still deciding how to breathe around it. Nathan's email had gone out Thursday evening, and by Friday morning the floor had processed the news with the specific energy of an office that runs on information, meaning people were professional about it publicly and buzzing about it privately. Emily arrived at 7:38, her earliest all week, and sat down and opened her laptop and pretended to read her email while monitoring the floor the way she always monitored rooms she was uncertain about. Nathan came in at 8:05. He looked like himself. That was the thing she noticed first. He was not visibly burdened, not performing relief, not doing the thing people sometimes did after a big professional decision, where they walked a little differently to signal that they'd made peace with something. He looked like a man who had made a decision he believed in, which was somehow both easier and harder to look at. He went to his office, did not close the door. Priya appeared at Emily's desk at 9 with a coffee she hadn't asked for, and the expression of someone who has decided to be direct. "Did you know?" Priya asked. "No." "Really?" "Really." Priya absorbed this. "He said he's moving to an advisory role. That's usually code for—" She paused, recalibrating. "Actually, I don't know what that's code for in his case because honestly, I still don't entirely know who he is." Emily said nothing. "You're not surprised enough," Priya said, studying her. "I'm surprised. You look like someone who was already preparing for something." Emily looked up from her screen. "Priya, I have a full Friday." Priya retreated, but not without a look that said this conversation was not finished, merely relocated. Across the floor, Nathan was on his laptop, and he was writing a message he'd been composing in his head since Thursday afternoon. Not an email. He'd already done the email, the official one, the professional language. This was something else. He had 3 drafts of it in a notes app on his phone, all of them wrong in different ways. Too much. Not enough. Too careful. He deleted all 3 and sat with the blank screen for a while. What he actually wanted to say was, "I should have told you sooner. I should have said it differently. I should have said a lot of things differently, and I'm aware that I've run out of the kind of time where it would have been clean." What he wanted to say was, "I'm leaving, but that's not the same as disappearing." What he wanted to say was something he couldn't put into a work message, a professional communication, a document that would sit in a sent folder with his name on it. He closed the app, opened the Vance deck instead, and spent an hour on something finite and correctable and real. The morning passed without incident. It was after lunch at around 1:30 when it almost happened, the thing that nearly broke the whole careful surface of the day wide open. Emily was walking back from the kitchen, and Nathan was in the hallway at the same time, and they almost ran into each other at the corner near the copy room, and they both stopped short in the particular way of 2 people who have managed significant proximity for 2 years and built up a reliable physical sense of where the other person is. "Sorry," Emily said, stepping back. "My fault," Nathan said. They stood there. The copy machine hummed behind the door. Someone on the far side of the floor was laughing at something. "Congratulations," Nathan said. "On the promotion." She looked at him. "How did you—" "Gerald mentioned it when I was in his office Monday. He said the review was Thursday." He paused. "I knew it was going to be you." "You don't know that." "I did, actually. The Caldwell numbers alone would have done it." He said it plainly, without the slight edge he sometimes brought to professional assessments of her work, the edge that she had always suspected was a form of protection. "You've run the best client record this division has seen in 3 years." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said, and the way she said it was different from how she'd said it to Gerald, different from how she'd said it to Priya. It was the version with nothing around it. No professional wrapper, just the word. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "About leaving." "You told the office." "I mean you specifically." He held her gaze. "You should have heard it from me, not from Gerald, not from an email." Something shifted in her expression. Something small, something she controlled quickly. A moment of surprise that she covered with composure, but he'd seen it. "Why?" she asked. She wasn't being combative. She was asking because she needed to hear what he'd say. He opened his mouth. Closed it. A junior analyst named Devon came around the corner with a stack of papers and excused himself past them both, and the moment, the one that had been right on the edge of becoming something, absorbed the interruption and reset. "Because we've worked together for 2 years, Nathan said when Devon was gone. "That means something, that's all." Emily nodded, looked at him for another beat, then nodded again. "Have a good afternoon," she said. and walked back to her desk. That's all. She sat down and stared at her screen and turned those 2 words over a few times. That means something. That's all. He was telling her something, and he wasn't telling her anything, and she was doing the same thing back. And the two of them had apparently built an entire professional relationship on the architecture of almost saying the real thing and then not quite. She had 4 days left to decide if she was going to keep doing that. The weekend arrived and Nathan took Lily to the Science Museum on Saturday because Lily had been asking for 3 weeks and he had been postponing for reasons that mostly amounted to having too much going on in his own head. And he owed her a Saturday without the distracted version of himself. They spent 4 hours there. Lily was interested in everything at an intensity that was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. She had opinions about the dinosaur exhibits, strong feelings about the solar system display, and a 20-minute fixation on a water pressure demonstration that involved her getting slightly wet in a way that was technically not permitted but that Nathan quietly decided was not worth preventing. "Dad," she said at one point while they were eating sandwiches on a bench near the space exhibit, "are you sad?" Nathan looked at her. "Why would I be sad?" "You have your thinking face on." "What's my thinking face?" She demonstrated. A slight furrow, a distance in the eyes, the particular look of someone running a calculation they haven't solved. It was, Nathan realized with a start, remarkably accurate. "I'm not sad," he said. "I'm just thinking about something." "What something?" "Grown-up something." Lily considered this with the patient skepticism she applied to most adult explanations. "Is it about work?" "A little." "Is it about a person?" Nathan looked at his sandwich. "Why would it be about a person?" "Because," she said, with the precision of someone who had learned to observe adults closely, "work faces and people faces look the same on you, but you do the work face faster and the people face slower." He stared at her for a moment. "You're 7, he said. "And a half," she said, and went back to her sandwich. He thought about that on the drive home, about fast thinking and slow thinking, about the particular kind of slow that happened when you were trying to solve something that couldn't be solved by analysis, only by the more uncomfortable method of saying the true thing out loud and watching what happened next. He dropped Lily at his mother's for the evening, her weekly sleepover, a tradition they'd established 2 years ago that both Lily and his mother were fiercely protective of, and drove home through the city in the particular quiet of a Saturday night when you're not going anywhere. He sat in his kitchen with a glass of water and his phone. And he thought about 9 days, 8 now, 7 by tomorrow. He thought about a woman standing in a hallway who had said thank you with nothing around it. He thought, "You are out of time for the slow kind of thinking." He picked up his phone, opened a message to Emily, typed, "Are you around this weekend?" He stared at it. He deleted it. He put the phone face down on the counter. He picked it up again 10 minutes later, typed the same message, stared at it longer this time. Then he sent it. The reply took 6 minutes. "Yes. Why?" He typed, "I owe you a real conversation, not a hallway. Pause. If you want one." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Okay," she wrote. "Tomorrow. Coffee?" He looked at the word for a moment. Something moved through him that he chose not to categorize too precisely. "Yes," he wrote back. "I'll send you a place." He put the phone down, breathed. The Sunday coffee did not happen. What happened instead was that Emily woke up at 7 on Sunday morning with a tension headache that she recognized immediately as the physical manifestation of having been braced about something for 4 days straight, and she lay in bed staring at the ceiling and had a brief, ungenerous internal debate about whether she was going to do the brave thing or the protective thing. The brave thing was to go and have the conversation and say what was actually true and deal with whatever came of it. The protective thing was to show up, have a professional, warm, collegial goodbye conversation, shake his hand, and keep everything she actually felt in the place she had always kept it, behind her sternum, where it was manageable. She had been choosing the protective thing for a year and a half. She put on real clothes and went. The coffee place he'd sent was a small independent spot on Wicker Park. Not a chain, not an office-adjacent place. Not somewhere either of them would run into Meridian colleagues. She recognized the choice for what it was. He'd been deliberate about it. She got there 2 minutes before he did, ordered before he arrived, and was sitting at a table near the back window when he walked in. He was in a gray sweater and dark jeans, and she registered with irritating clarity that he looked better out of a suit, less armored, more like an actual person, like someone she could talk to without the whole professional scaffolding between them. He spotted her, ordered at the counter, and came over. You got here first, he said, sitting down. I'm always somewhere before I'm supposed to be. It's a character flaw. Or a character strength. Depends on the context. They sat with that for a second. The coffee shop was warm and not too crowded and smelled like ground beans and something baking in the back. Outside the window, Wicker Park on a Sunday was doing its slow, unhurried thing. You said you owe me a conversation, Emily said. She wasn't going to make him ease into it. She respected both of them too much for that. I do. So. Nathan wrapped his hands around his cup, looked at the table, then at her. I'm not just a director at Meridian. She waited. Sterling Venture Capital, he said. I own it. Founded it 7 years ago. It's significant in terms of scale. She absorbed this. She had suspected something along these lines. The Feldman reaction. The low-level authority that radiated from him in a way that didn't fully match his official title. The fact that a man his age with his ability was running strategic projects at a mid-market consulting firm when he clearly could have been running entire companies. The pieces had been sitting in front of her. She'd chosen not to assemble them. Why didn't you say so? She said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Because if you knew, it would have changed everything. The way you talked to me, what you said in meetings, whether you pushed back or I would have pushed back either way. I know, he said. I know that now, but I didn't at the beginning. He paused. And then once I did know it, once it was clear that you were exactly the kind of person who doesn't rearrange herself for status, it had already become the one place where I could just be a person doing work. Without it. She was quiet for a moment. That's a significant thing to keep from a colleague. Yes. From someone you work with every day for 2 years. Yes. She picked up her cup, set it down without drinking. Is that why you're leaving? The visibility thing caught up? No. He met her eyes directly. I'm leaving because I've been using Meridian as a way to avoid something I needed to figure out. And I figured it out, and staying past that point would be, he searched for the word, dishonest. Dishonest to who? To myself, primarily. He paused. And to you. The coffee shop continued around them, indifferent and ambient. Someone at the counter laughed at something the barista said. Nathan, she said. I know, he said. I know this is... Will you let me say something? He stopped. She looked at the table for a moment. Not because she needed to gather courage. She knew, enough courage. She was gathering accuracy. She wanted to say the thing exactly right, not because she needed it to sound good, but because she had spent too long not saying it, and she wanted the version she finally said to be true. I've been telling myself this was professional rivalry for about a year longer than it actually was professional rivalry, she said. I knew what it was. I had things to prove. To myself, mostly. And I couldn't separate the proving from the feeling, so I kept the feeling where it couldn't complicate anything. He was very still. I'm not asking you to stay, she said. That's not what this is. I know why you're going, and I think it's the right call for you and Lily, and I'm not going to be the person who makes a decision like that harder. She looked at him steadily. But I spent a year and a half pretending I didn't care what happened in that office, as long as the work was right, and the work was right, and it turns out I still care what happens. So I needed to say that, once, out loud, to you. Nathan didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. She held the silence. She was good at holding silence. You didn't grow up the way she grew up without learning that silence was not always something that needed filling. I've been trying to figure out how to say the same thing since October, he said finally. October. The Tuesday meeting, the Brennan account debate. You took apart the revenue projection in 4 moves, and I sat there watching, and I thought... He stopped. I thought something I didn't have a name for at the time. And now? He looked at her. Now I have a name for it. I've had a name for it for a while. I just couldn't say it inside that building, with the professional history between us and the promotion and everything that was already complicated. And now we're not in the building. And now we're not in the building, he agreed. She looked at him across the table. This man she had argued with and learned from and looked for in every room she entered and refused to admit she was looking for, and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for a long time. You have a lot of things you haven't told me, she said. I know. That's going to have to change. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, something quieter. Something like relief making its way to the surface. Is that a condition? It's an expectation, she said, which in my experience is more serious. He actually smiled then. The real version, not the contained professional version she'd seen in meetings, but the unguarded one, the one that changed his whole face. She had seen it once before, when Lily's name had come up in conversation. She cataloged it, and the part of her that cataloged everything, and decided she wanted to see it again. "I have a daughter," he said, "and a company I don't talk about, and a parking ticket I keep forgetting to pay, and I think about you with a frequency that I spent a year trying to characterize as professional interest." "That's a start," she said. "What else do you want to know?" "Everything," she said. "But not today. Today I want to know one thing." "What?" She held his gaze. "Why the advisory role at Harlow Partners? What does that give you that Meridian doesn't?" He considered this. "Time," he said. "Real time. Not just early pickup Tuesdays and every other weekend. Actual, structural time built into the role, for Lily, and for whatever else matters." "Whatever else matters," she repeated. "Yes." She picked up her coffee, drank it this time. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay?" "Okay. That's the right reason." They sat there for another hour and a half, not talking about work, not entirely, talking about Columbus, Ohio, in winter, and what it felt like to be the kid who read books with a flashlight, and what Lily had said at the Science Museum about his thinking face, which made Emily laugh in a way that he stored somewhere and intended to keep. They talked about his mother's brownstone and Emily's grandmother's fire escape garden, about the specific loneliness of building something large entirely on your own, and the different specific loneliness of working your way up through rooms where you were consistently the only person who understood exactly what it had cost to get there. They did not talk about what happened next. That conversation was hovering at the edge of both of them, and they let it hover. Today was not that conversation. Today was the other one. The honest accounting, the first real version of both of them, spoken plainly across a small table in a coffee shop in Wicker Park, while Sunday moved quietly outside the window. When they finally left, they stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment, and Nathan said, 7 days. "I know," she said. "That's not very much time." "No." "Emily." He said her name the way he said things he meant. Low and direct and without decoration. "I don't want to leave without knowing what we're doing." She looked at him. The cold had put color in her face, and she had her coat collar up, and she looked like herself. Not the office version, not the armor version, just the actual person, standing on a sidewalk, holding the remains of a coffee she'd been nursing for 20 minutes. "We're not doing nothing," she said. "Whatever we're doing, it's not nothing." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a clean resolution. It was what it was. Two people with 7 days and a lot of still complicated things between them, standing in the cold, deciding to be honest about that instead of pretending it wasn't real. He nodded. She started to say something else, then didn't. "I'll see you Monday," he said. "You'll see me Monday," she agreed. She walked toward her car. He watched her go. 2 seconds, then 3. Then turned in the other direction. The city was cold and bright and indifferent, and somewhere across town Lily was at her grandmother's brownstone, probably explaining something with great conviction to someone who was trying to keep up. And Nathan Sterling walked back to his car with 7 days on his mind and something warm and inconvenient sitting right in the middle of his chest. And he didn't do anything about either, not yet. But the coffee shop was behind him, and the conversation had happened, and what was left was the 7 days, each one now a different kind of weight than they'd been the week before. He drove home. She drove home. And Monday was already coming. The Monday of the second to last week arrived the way every Monday arrives when you're counting down something, too fast and too slow at the same time. Emily got in at 7:39, which was her best time all month, and sat at her desk and pulled up her email and found, at the top of the queue, a message from Gerald Whitmore about the SVP transition timeline, detailed and practical and full of the ordinary machinery of professional life continuing forward. She read it, responded, forwarded 2 items to Marcus. Then she looked up and Nathan was walking through the elevator doors with his coffee. Same time as always, same navy coat, same particular quality of motion that she had spent 2 years pretending she didn't track. He looked toward her desk before he looked anywhere else. She looked back. Neither of them smiled. That wasn't the kind of thing they did publicly. Not yet. Not in this building with these colleagues and this particular shared history that the rest of the floor thought they understood. But something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe. Or the specific kind of recognition that happens when 2 people have finally said the true thing and are now learning what to do with the truth. He went to his office. She went back to her email. Priya, from across the room, observed all of this with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific development and is experiencing the quiet satisfaction of being correct. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. 6 days left. 5. 4. The week moved. 4 days left became 3 without anything dramatic happening, which was its own kind of tension. The office had settled into the particular rhythm of a workplace processing a departure. Slightly more considerate than usual, slightly more aware of time. People stopping by Nathan's doorway for conversations that were nominally about work and actually about the fact that he was leaving. He handled all of it with the same composed directness he brought to everything, warm enough to be genuine, brief enough to not perform grief he didn't feel. He was not grieving leaving Meridian. He was feeling something more complicated about what leaving Meridian meant for everything else. Emily watched the small procession of colleagues through his office doorway from her desk across the floor, and she kept her face neutral and her attention on her own work, and she was mostly successful at both. Mostly. There were moments, a laugh she recognized from 40 feet away, a turn of his head, the particular way he stood when he was listening to someone he actually wanted to hear, when the neutrality cost something. She paid it. She was good at paying things. They had texted twice since Sunday. Nothing significant. He had sent her an article about a supply chain model she'd mentioned in passing during the coffee shop conversation. No message attached, just the link. She had replied, "This is actually useful." Annoying. He had replied, "You're welcome." That was all. It was enough. It was the exact right amount for two people who were feeling their way through something new while still sharing a professional address. Tuesday's morning meeting was the last one he would run. Emily knew this going in. She sat in her usual seat, 3 to his left, and opened her laptop and pulled up the agenda, and the meeting happened the way meetings happened. Nathan at the head of the table, the week's priorities on the screen, Priya with her notebook, Marcus with his coffee, the Brennan account and the Vance deck, and the Caldwell follow-up all requiring attention. Ordinary, functional. The room doing what it always did. Except that at one point, Nathan was making an argument about timeline compression on the Vance transport rollout, and Emily said, "That assumes the vendor contracts finalize on schedule, which they historically don't." And Nathan said, "Which is why I built a 2-week buffer into the second phase." And Emily said, "A 2-week buffer isn't enough if the customs documentation lags," which it did on both previous quarters. And Nathan said, "Fair, add a week." And she said, 3. And he looked at her and said, 2.5? And she said, "Fine." And the room had gone quiet in the specific way it went quiet when these two people reached agreement, which felt like watching two tectonic plates decide to cooperate. Gerald, seated at the far end of the table, wrote something in his folder. Priya wrote something in her notebook. Afterward, when the room had cleared out, Marcus lingered long enough to say to Priya in the hallway, "I give that relationship 6 months before it's either really good or a complete disaster." 4 months, Priya said, "and it'll be really good." "How do you know?" BT. "'Cause the only people who argue like that are people who are actually listening to each other," she said. "Most people just wait to talk." Marcus thought about this. That's surprisingly wise. "I have layers," Priya said, and walked away. Wednesday morning, 3 days before Nathan's last day, he arrived at his office to find something on his desk that he hadn't put there. It was a parking ticket, faded, folded in half, clearly old, with a post-it note attached that read, "I believe this belongs to you, unless you've paid it, which you said you hadn't." 8. He stared at it. He had mentioned the parking ticket in passing on Sunday in the context of listing small domestic failures alongside his larger professional ones. He had not expected her to track it down. He did not know how she had tracked it down, and the fact that she had done it without explaining how, without making a thing of it, without attaching anything to it except a note dry enough to be indistinguishable from her usual professional communications, that was the most Emily Harper thing that had ever happened. He smiled at the post-it. He actually paid the ticket that morning from his phone before 9 o'clock. Then he wrote back on a post-it and walked it to her desk while she was in a meeting. "Paid. You're insufferable. Thank you." She found it when she got back, read it twice, put it in the inside pocket of her bag, next to the photograph she kept there that she never put on her desk. He didn't know about the photograph. Not yet. Wednesday afternoon brought a problem that had nothing to do with anything between them and everything to do with the fact that work continues regardless of what's happening in the personal lives of the people doing it. The Caldwell group called at 2:15 with a concern. Their ops director, a man named Peter Soames, who communicated exclusively in rapid-fire sentences and thinly veiled anxiety, had flagged an inconsistency in the Q1 projections that Emily had presented the previous week. Not an error exactly, but a discrepancy between two data sets that would look like an error to anyone who didn't know the sourcing. Emily was on the phone with him for 40 minutes. She had the documentation in front of her, pulled the relevant pages, walked Soames through the reconciliation methodically, and by the end of the call had not only resolved the concern, but identified a separate issue in Caldwell's own internal data that she walked him through as a courtesy. When she hung up, she sat back and exhaled. "How bad?" Nathan asked from her doorway. She looked up. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." He leaned against the frame. "Sourcing discrepancy?" "Two vendor data sets using different fiscal year cutoffs. Nothing wrong with our model. It was pulling from both correctly. Soames just hadn't seen the footnote." "You find the secondary issue?" "Their depreciation schedule has a classification error going back 3 quarters. I flagged it." Nathan studied her for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. Most people would have just resolved the original concern and let it go." She started reorganizing the papers on her desk. "Most people aren't trying to build a client relationship that lasts more than one contract cycle." She paused. "Also, it was just the right thing to do." He was quiet for a beat. "You're going to be very good at this role." She looked up. He said it the same way he said everything he meant, directly, without framing, like a fact he was reporting rather than a compliment he was offering. Like it would be strange to him to have thought it and not said it. "I know," she said. And then, because honesty had been working better than protection lately. "Thank you." He nodded, stayed in the doorway another second. "You have dinner plans tonight?" he asked. She looked at him. "Are you asking me something?" "I'm asking if you have dinner plans tonight." "That depends on why you're asking." "Because I'd like to buy you dinner," he said. "And I have 3 days left in this building, and I'd rather not wait until the last one." She held his gaze. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, but the visible moment of a person deciding to let a thing be what it is instead of managing it into something smaller. "I don't have plans," she said. 7 o'clock, he said. "I'll send you a place." He pushed off the doorframe and went back to his office, and Emily turned back to her desk, and the afternoon continued around both of them in the ordinary way of things that are not actually ordinary at all. The restaurant was small and Italian and on a side street in Lincoln Park. The kind of place that didn't need to advertise because the people who knew about it came back regularly, and the people who didn't know about it wandered past without ever suspecting. Nathan was there before her. His car was outside when she arrived at 7:04 and she was 4 minutes late, which was not like her, but she had changed her outfit twice and had a brief, unflattering internal argument about why she was changing her outfit twice. She had settled on what she'd been wearing the first time. That felt like some kind of wisdom. He was at a corner table, out of the direct sightline of the door, and he stood when she came in, which was old-fashioned in a way she hadn't expected and didn't dislike. "You changed your outfit," he said when she sat down. She stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because you have a piece of lint on your sleeve that's a different color from the jacket you're wearing," he said, "which suggests a recent change. Also, you look slightly like someone who made a decision and then unmade it." "You're observant to a degree I find unsettling," she said. "You do the same thing. You just do it faster." She picked up the menu. "I changed my outfit once." "I believe you." She looked at him over the top of the menu. He was watching her with that specific expression, the not-quite smile, the steady attention, and she put the menu down because she was not going to perform interest in pasta while he was looking at her like that. "This is strange," she said. "Yes. We've had coffee and now dinner, and we still technically work together until Friday." "Technically." "And you're moving to a different firm in 2 weeks." "3, he said. "I have a week off between." She absorbed this. "What are you doing with a week off?" "Lily has a break from school. We're driving up to Michigan. She wants to see the lake in winter. She has a theory about the ice formations." Something in Emily's expression shifted in the way it did when he talked about Lily. A loosening, like a window being opened somewhere. "What's the theory?" "Something about salt content affecting crystal structure. I don't know where she's getting this, but she's been researching it on her tablet for 2 weeks and she has opinions." "She sounds like someone I know," Emily said. Nathan looked at her. That's the nicest and most terrifying thing you've ever said to me. She laughed. The real version, not the polite version. And the restaurant continued around them, and the wine came, and the food came, and the evening moved the way evenings move when two people have finally stopped working so hard to be in the same room and have simply started being there. They talked about things they hadn't talked about yet. Not the big things, or not only the big things, but the specific texture of each other's lives. She told him about Columbus in a way she hadn't told many people. Not the hardship narrative, not the triumphant climb version, just the actual thing, the realness of it, what the apartment smelled like, what her mother's hands had looked like when she came home from a double shift, what the public library on 5th Street had meant to a kid who needed somewhere to be. He listened the way he listened when he was actually listening, without moving to fill gaps, without offering the premature reassurance that most people reached for because silence made them uncomfortable. He just let her say it. "My ex-wife grew up with money," he said, at a certain point, not as a deflection, as a thing that mattered, that connected to what she'd said. "And I didn't entirely. Not poor. My mother worked. We were fine. But the first time I walked into a boardroom at 29 with my company's name on the agenda, I counted ceiling tiles while I waited for the meeting to start because it was the only way I could keep my breathing normal." She looked at him. This was not a thing she had expected him to say. "I don't tell people that," he said. "Obviously." "Obviously," she agreed. "Why tell me?" He considered this seriously, the way he considered things he was actually uncertain about. "Because you'd know if I didn't," he said finally. "You have a way of knowing when people are presenting the cleaned-up version. And I'm tired of presenting the cleaned-up version to you. It's been—" He paused. "A lot of work. You've been presenting the cleaned-up version to me for 2 years?" "The partially cleaned-up version. I couldn't fully clean it up with you. You kept asking the right questions in the wrong meetings." She was quiet for a moment, then, "The wrong meetings?" "The ones where I couldn't answer honestly without making everything significantly more complicated. And now?" He picked up his glass. "Now the meetings are over." The evening ended the way good evenings end. Not dramatically, not with any formal resolution, but with the particular sense of something having shifted into a better alignment. He walked her to her car. They stood on the sidewalk in the cold, the restaurant warm and lit behind them, the street quiet enough that the city felt, for a moment, like it was giving them some space. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah, I've been telling myself for 2 years that I was protecting my focus." She looked at him steadily. "I think I was also just scared." He didn't rush to answer that. He stood with it for a moment, which was one of the things she had come to recognize about him, that he didn't manage difficult admissions, he just held them. "I know the feeling," he said. "What were you scared of?" "That you'd find out who I actually was and recalibrate, the way people always do." She looked at him for a long moment. "And now I know. And now you know." "And I haven't recalibrated," she said. Something moved through his expression. Relief was part of it, and something older than relief. "No," he said. "You haven't." The cold was real, and the street was quiet, and she had her hands in her coat pockets, and he was close enough that the distance between them felt deliberate rather than incidental. "2 more days," she said. "2 more days," he agreed. She took one hand out of her pocket, held it out, not for a handshake. She wasn't sure what she meant by it, some gesture toward acknowledging the strangeness of standing here, at the edge of everything that was changing. He took it, just held it, briefly, warm and solid and real, and then let go. "Good night, Emily," he said. "Good night," she said. She got in her car. He stood there until she'd pulled out, then walked to his own. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and the heater running and something sitting in her chest that was nothing like anxiety, nothing like the braced feeling she'd been carrying for 2 weeks. It was something much simpler and much harder to manage than anxiety. It was hope. She was not entirely comfortable with hope. Hope required a specific kind of vulnerability that she had spent most of her life either converting into work or shutting down entirely. But it was there, and she was 30 years old, and she had just spent 3 hours talking to a man who counted ceiling tiles to keep his breathing normal the first time he walked into a boardroom, and she was not going to manage this one into something small. She drove. Thursday arrived the way penultimate days arrived, with a specific texture of almost that made everything slightly sharper than usual. One more morning meeting, one more afternoon of Vance transport documents and Caldwell follow-up emails and the ordinary machinery of the firm running its course. Emily was at her desk by 7:35. her record for the month. Nathan came in at 8:10, which was the latest he'd arrived all week, and he looked like a man who had not slept entirely well, not wrecked, not visibly exhausted, but with the faint under-pressure around his eyes that she now recognized as the signature of a night spent in the slow kind of thinking. He went to his office. She did not go to his doorway. They had an unspoken agreement about the office, she thought. Keep it what it was, let it stay professional and functional, don't let whatever is happening between them loose in the building where everything is watched, and Priya has a notebook. The morning meeting was brief. 2 agenda items, 1 clean resolution, 1 item kick 2 next week, by which point Nathan would be gone, and the next week would be Emily's meeting to run, a fact that landed with a certain quiet weight in the room, even though nobody said so. After the meeting, Gerald pulled Nathan aside. Emily watched this without appearing to watch it, a skill she'd refined over 2 years, and saw Gerald put a hand on Nathan's shoulder in the particular way of a man who is a supervisor, and also, quietly, something closer to grateful. Nathan nodded at something Gerald said. They shook hands. It was the kind of moment that had nothing performative in it and didn't need an audience, and Emily looked deliberately away. The afternoon was full. She was deep into the SVP transition documentation, reviewing accounts, setting up introduction calls with clients she'd be taking on, working through the structural handoff with the outgoing team, and the hours moved fast the way hours do when the work is real. By 5 o'clock, she had covered more ground than she'd planned, which was satisfying in the specific way of progress you can measure. She looked up from her screen, and Nathan's office was empty. She looked at the clock. 5:18. She looked back at his office. The lamp on his desk was off. His chair was pushed in. His monitor was dark. He had left without saying anything. She sat with this for a moment. It wasn't a wound. She wasn't going to make it into something dramatic. But it was present. A small absence where an expectation she hadn't fully acknowledged had been sitting. She packed up her own things, pulled on her coat. Her phone buzzed. Nathan. Lily had a thing with a friend that I forgot was today. Had to bolt. I'm sorry. I meant to say something before I left. She read it standing at her desk with her bag over her shoulder. Emily. It's fine. How's the thing? Nathan. She made a papier-mâché volcano that did not erupt on schedule and took it very personally, currently debriefing. She smiled before she could help it. Emily. A scientist processing failure, a formative experience. Nathan. She blamed the baking soda. Emily. Statistically, the most common scapegoat. A pause. Then, tomorrow's the last day. She looked at that sentence for a moment. Emily. I know. Nathan. I'd like to see you after, if you're up for it. She put her phone in her pocket without answering immediately, rode the elevator down, walked out into the cold. The city was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on, traffic thickening, the air with that particular metallic clarity that Chicago gets in January when the temperature is serious. She pulled her gloves on, pulled her phone out. Emily. Yes. She put the phone away and walked to her car. Friday arrived. The last day of a chapter, though neither of them would have used that word in conversation because it was slightly too neat for what it actually felt like, which was messier and more specific than any chapter metaphor could capture. Emily came in at her usual time. The floor was running normally, which felt both appropriate and slightly wrong. The idea that the day Nathan Sterling left Meridian would look, from the outside, like any other Friday. The coffee machine worked. The Vance deck was in the shared drive. Marcus had sent 3 emails before 9. Nathan came in at 8 o'clock, the earliest he'd arrived all week, and Emily registered this without being asked to register it. He went to his office and began, methodically and without visible ceremony, the work of handing things off. He had been doing this all week in parallel. Documentation, briefings, file organization. But today it was finishing. Today it was becoming complete. She watched him through the glass partition, work through the morning with the focused quiet of someone closing something cleanly. He was good at that. Endings that didn't leave a mess. At noon, the team had a small informal lunch in the conference room. Gerald's doing, low-key and thoughtful, sandwiches and a brief toast that nobody made too long because Nathan was clearly not a man who wanted a long toast. People said the things people say. They meant most of them. Emily sat across the table from him. They didn't talk much directly. They didn't need to. The room was doing the talking, and beneath the room there was a conversation they were both saving for later. When the lunch broke up and people filtered back to their desks, Priya appeared at Emily's side with the particular expression she wore when she had decided to say the thing. "I know what's happening," Priya said. "You know nothing," Emily said pleasantly. "I know everything," Priya said. "I've known for about 6 months. I'm choosing to be classy about it. That's a first." "I have layers," Priya said and walked away. The afternoon moved at a particular pace, slow in the stretches, fast in the moments. At 3 o'clock, Nathan had a final call with a Meridian client he'd been managing. A transition call where he introduced the new contact and stepped back gracefully in the way that real professionals do, making it look easy because he'd put the work in beforehand. At 4 o'clock, he returned 2 books he'd borrowed from Marcus that Marcus had completely forgotten about. At 4:30, he stood in his doorway for a moment, looking at the office floor. Not dramatically, not performing a farewell. Just a man looking at a place he'd spent 2 years in, registering it before it became something he used to do. Emily was at her desk. She felt him looking and looked up. He tilted his head slightly toward the hallway. A small gesture, unmistakable. She picked up her phone and keys and met him by the elevator. They rode down together. The lobby was emptying out with the end-of-day drift of a building's worth of people making for the exits. "Dinner?" he said when they came out onto the street. "Dinner," she said. They walked 4 blocks to a place neither of them had planned, just found, the way you find things when you're not trying too hard. A small bar and grill on a side street that was warm inside and not too crowded on a Friday before 7. They took a booth near the back, ordered without looking at the menu too hard. The conversation started somewhere unremarkable. Something about the transition call, something about the Caldwell follow-up she'd need to run next week. And then slid into the actual thing, the way it always did now, the way it had been doing since Sunday's coffee shop and Wednesday's dinner and all the small exchanges in between. "How's it feel?" she asked. "Leaving?" "Yes." He thought about it genuinely, which she appreciated. He didn't give her the polished answer. "Like taking off a coat I didn't know I was still wearing," he said. "Not the firm, the role I'd been playing in it." "The unrecognized genius?" "The man hiding in a mid-market consulting firm." She tilted her head. "Were you hiding?" "No, I was recovering." He picked up his glass. "There's a difference. Hiding is passive. Recovering is what you do when you've been running something at a pace you can't sustain and you need somewhere that feels like actual work again without the machinery of the larger thing grinding all the time." "And you recovered." "I recovered," he said. And then, after a beat, "I also found something I didn't expect to find." She met his eyes. "Is that what this is? Something you found?" "I don't know what to call it yet," he said. "I know what it isn't. It isn't simple, and it isn't convenient, and it isn't—" He paused. "Something I can file under a category I already have." "That's not nothing," she said. "No," he said. "It's not nothing." The bar moved around them. Someone put something quiet on the sound system that was unidentifiable and fine. Their food arrived and they ate and talked, and the evening did what it had been doing all week, moving at a pace that felt like it was making up for lost time without rushing anything. At one point, she told him about the photograph in her bag. She hadn't planned to. It came out of something they were talking about, some thread about the things people carry around that they don't explain to anyone. "It's my mother," she said, "at work. Her actual workplace, the hospital laundry. She's in her uniform and she's smiling at someone off camera, and she looks—" She stopped. "She looks like someone who chose her life. Even the hard parts of it, that's not nothing either." He was quiet for a moment. "How old were you in the picture?" "I wasn't in it. I took it. I was 15. She didn't know I had my friend's camera." She looked at the table. "I've never told anyone why I keep it." "Why do you keep it?" "Because she worked harder than anyone I've ever met," Emily said. "And she never once made it feel like a burden to me. And I want to remember what that looks like. Work that you own, that you carry without putting it on anyone else." She paused. "It's what I'm trying to do." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're doing it," he said. "Not a performance. Not a comfort. A fact." She looked up. "I know," she said. "But it helps to hear it." They stayed until almost 9, left together. Stood on the sidewalk in the cold, same configuration as Wednesday. The city around them, the night clear, the distance between them, that thing it had been becoming all week. "I want to say something," Nathan said. "Okay, I have—" He stopped. Tried again. "There are things about my life that are complicated. The company, the public side of it, the demands on my time, on Lily's life, the way things look when they're not contained. I'm not offering you something simple. She looked at him. Nathan, I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus with a broken radiator and a father who was there half the time. I did not arrive at 30 expecting simple. He looked at her for a moment. Something in him shifted. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent. Like a person who has been standing at a door and finally decided to open it. I'd like to take you to dinner again, he said. Next week, not as coworkers. We're already not coworkers, she said. As of approximately 4:30 this afternoon. Then as two people who have spent 2 years arguing in conference rooms and are ready to try something else. She looked at him. The cold was real, and his eyes were steady, and she had nothing left to protect herself against. Nothing that made the protection worth what it cost. Yes, she said. He stepped forward. She didn't step back. He was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his expression. Not triumphant, not relieved, just present. Just here. He kissed her, not perfectly. His hand was cold when it came up to her jaw, and she made a small sound against his mouth that was somewhere between startled and certain, and the angle was slightly off for the first half second. And then it wasn't, and the city continued around them in the ordinary way of cities that do not reorganize themselves for important moments. When they separated, she kept her eyes closed for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. Your hands are freezing, she said. Sorry. Don't apologize, just... She reached up and wrapped both her hands around his. Better? He looked down at their hands, looked at her. Yeah, he said. Better. They stood there for a moment longer in the cold and the dark and the ordinary, extraordinary Friday night. And then he said he had to pick Lily up from his mother's before 10, and she said she had to call Jasmine before Jasmine imploded from curiosity. And they said goodnight for the second time that week on a sidewalk. And this time when she got in her car, she sat there for 30 seconds with her hands on the wheel and her heart doing something slightly inconvenient and a smile on her face that she was not working to contain. She called Jasmine. Talk, Jasmine said, before Emily had produced a single syllable. I'll tell you everything, Emily said. Start from the beginning. The beginning is 2 years ago, Emily said. We might be here a while. I have nowhere to be, Jasmine said. And Emily, driving home through the city that had witnessed all of it without commenting, started from the beginning. Jasmine listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was how Emily knew it was serious. Jasmine interrupted everything. She had interrupted Emily's college graduation speech from the audience, quietly but still. The fact that she sat on the other end of the phone for 45 minutes and said nothing except occasional sounds of confirmation, that was its own kind of verdict. When Emily finished, Jasmine said, I told you. You told me something, Emily said. You didn't tell me this specifically. I told you that not everything that can hurt you will, and that some things are worth the risk. That covers this specifically. Emily was in her kitchen now, coat finally off, tea finally made, and actually being drunk. Outside, the city had gone dark and quiet, in the way it did past 10 on weeknights when the cold was serious enough to move people indoors. I'm not telling you to slow down, Jasmine said. I'm not telling you to speed up. I'm just telling you that the version of you that would have shut this down 3 months ago was protecting herself from something that turns out to be real. So, Emily agreed. How was the kiss? Emily looked at her tea. His hands were cold. That's not an answer. It was real, Emily said. It wasn't cinematic. It was just real. That's the best kind, Jasmine said. Emily thought about that after she hung up, about real versus cinematic, about the 2 seconds she'd kept her eyes closed and what that meant. Not a performance of being moved, just the actual thing, the genuine need of a person who had been braced for a long time and was, briefly, not braced at all. She went to bed at 11. She slept better than she had in 2 weeks. The week Nathan was in Michigan with Lily, Emily ran her first Monday morning meeting as SVP of Operations. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, thoroughly, specifically, with more documentation than strictly necessary, because she trusted preparation in a way she didn't fully trust improvisation. She had the agenda distributed by Friday. She had reviewed every active account. She had 3 items she wanted to move on immediately and 2 structural changes she was going to propose in the first 30 days. She walked into the conference room at 8:58, 2 minutes before the scheduled start, and took the seat at the head of the table. The room had 12 people in it. Most of them she'd worked alongside for years. A few she'd butted heads with. One, Marcus. She'd shaped into a substantially better analyst than he'd been when she'd first started working with him, though she'd never said that directly because he needed to believe he'd done it himself. And mostly, he had. Gerald was in the back, observing. He'd said he'd sit in for the first few and then step back. She appreciated the structure of it. Not abandonment, not hovering, just a present witness. She looked at the room. "All right," she said. "Let's start." She ran the meeting in 43 minutes. Clean, specific, no wasted motion. She argued with no one, not because she'd softened, but because she'd structured the agenda so that the potential friction points were addressed before they could become friction. She left two things open on purpose, flagged them explicitly, and said she wanted responses by Wednesday. That was the kind of thing Nathan had taught her, not directly, but by example. The difference between efficiency and the appearance of efficiency was usually whether you'd done the thinking beforehand. She didn't think about Nathan during the meeting. She thought about him immediately after, when the room was clearing out and she was gathering her notes, and Gerald stopped beside her and said, "Good meeting," in the specific tone he reserved for things he actually meant. "Thank you," she said. Nathan would have run it the same way, Gerald said, and then carefully, "Maybe better paced." She looked at him. "Are you complimenting me or him?" "Both," Gerald said. "You made each other better. That's not common." He picked up his folder. "It's a good thing, whatever it is." He left before she could respond to that. She stood in the empty conference room for a moment. She had known Gerald was perceptive. She had apparently underestimated by how much. Nathan texted from Michigan on Tuesday afternoon, a photograph of a frozen stretch of Lake Michigan shoreline, the ice formations Lily had theorized about actual and visible in the foreground. Below the photograph, she was right about the crystal structure. "She has requested I acknowledge this formally." Emily replied, "Formally acknowledged. Tell her the data supports the hypothesis." Nathan, "She says thank you and also wants to know if you're a scientist." Emily, "Tell her I'm adjacent to one." Nathan, "She says that counts." Emily looked at that exchange for longer than it warranted. There was something in it, the ease of it, the naturalness, the fact that it had happened without either of them orchestrating it, that felt like information, like evidence of something that was growing into its own shape without being forced into one. She put her phone in her desk drawer and went back to work. The week passed in the way of weeks when you are genuinely occupied. Not the forced occupation of someone using work to avoid a feeling, but the real kind. The kind where the work is actually demanding enough to require your full mind. The SVP transition was substantial. She had 17 active accounts to fully absorb, 2 team restructurings to propose, and a client review cycle that would hit in the 3rd week of January. She worked long hours, but they were her hours now. She was choosing them, not surviving them, and that distinction made a difference she hadn't fully anticipated. She called her mother on Wednesday evening. This was a bi-weekly thing, not scheduled, just habitual. The call that happened whenever Emily felt the need to recalibrate against something solid. Her mother's name was Sandra, and she had retired from the hospital laundry 3 years ago and was now, to Emily's ongoing astonishment, taking an online course in graphic design because she'd always been curious about it and had simply never had the time. "How's the new role?" Sandra asked. "Good, real, bigger than I expected in the day-to-day." "That's how it goes when you get what you worked for," her mother said. "It's never the size you imagined from the outside. It's always more complicated and more yours." Emily absorbed this. "That's accurate. How are you otherwise?" Her mother had a specific intonation for otherwise that had been refined over 30 years of knowing Emily. An intonation that meant, "I'm not asking about work, I'm asking about the person doing the work." "Otherwise," Emily said, "is also complicated." "Good complicated or bad complicated?" "Good." She paused. "I think good." "Tell me when you're sure," her mother said, without pressure. Not demanding the story, just leaving the door open the way she always had. The specific parenting skill of a woman who had known her daughter was going to find her own way, and had chosen to make sure the door was always there when she needed it. Emily thought about the photograph in her bag. Her mother at work, smiling at someone off camera, choosing her life. "I'll tell you when I'm sure," Emily said. Nathan came back from Michigan on Friday evening. He texted her from the road. "Back in the city. Lily is already planning the next expedition." Emily, "Where to?" Nathan, "Somewhere with tide pools, apparently. She's moved on from ice crystallization." Emily, "A polymath." Nathan, "She would like that word. I'm not going to tell her it applies to her yet because she'll use it in every sentence for a month. Emily smiled. Then, welcome back. A pause. Then, have dinner with me tomorrow. She typed, yes, immediately, without the usual beat of consideration, because she was done with the beat of consideration, because she had been careful and strategic and protected for 30 years, and she was not going to manage this into something small. Saturday dinner was at his place. She had not expected that when he'd said dinner. She had expected another restaurant, the Italian place again, or somewhere new. Instead, when she arrived at the address he'd sent, it was a brownstone in Lincoln Square, end unit, 3 floors, the kind of building that didn't announce itself. He opened the door before she knocked, which meant he'd heard her on the steps. You cooked, she said, because she could smell it. I attempted to cook, he said. There's a meaningful distinction. The inside of the building was not what she'd built in her imagination. She had mentally furnished it, in idle moments, with the austere precision of a man who lived alone and valued order, minimal, clean, slightly cold. Instead, it was warm and lived in and specific. There were books in actual piles rather than arranged for appearance. There was a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator with insufficient tape, so one corner had drooped. There was a small succulent on the kitchen windowsill that was slightly too dry, suggesting the kind of busy life where plants get remembered only intermittently. There was a couch that had clearly been sat on many thousands of times by a 7-year-old and her father. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of it and felt something settle in her chest that was not quite tenderness and not quite recognition, but lived somewhere in the vicinity of both. Lily's at my mother's? She asked. Overnight, he said. She knows I have company. She asked if it was someone from work. He handed Emily a glass of wine. I said formally, what did she say to that? She said, quote, is it the woman who knew about the crystal structure? Emily looked at him. How does she know about that? I may have mentioned it when I told her that you said her hypothesis was supported by the data. He turned back to the stove. She has a long memory. What did you tell her? I told her yes. And? He glanced back over his shoulder. She said, good. Exactly like that, one word, very serious. Then she went back to her tablet. Emily looked at the droop drawing on the refrigerator. Colorful and vigorous and slightly anatomically improbable. A horse, she thought, or possibly a large dog. The signature at the bottom was in the large, certain letters of a child who had not yet started doubting herself. Lily, it read, age 7.5. The dinner was pasta with a sauce that was genuinely good, and a salad that had slightly too much dressing, which Nathan acknowledged without prompting. I misjudged the olive oil. It's fine. It's a little much. Nathan, the pasta is excellent. I will survive the salad. You're being diplomatic. I am never diplomatic, she said. The pasta is genuinely excellent, and the salad has too much dressing. Both things are true. He looked at her for a second. You know, most people would just say everything was great. I'm not most people. No, he said. You really aren't. They ate at the kitchen table, which was slightly too small for the amount of food he'd made, and talked the way they had been talking all week. With the ease of people who have gotten through the difficult part of honesty and arrived somewhere on the other side where the conversation can breathe. She told him about the Monday meeting, about Gerald's comment, about the strange feeling of sitting at the head of a table she'd been angling toward for 3 years, and finding that the view from it was different than she'd expected. Different how? He asked. More responsibility, less performance. She thought about how to say it accurately. When I was fighting for the promotion, there was a lot of energy that went into proving the thing, demonstrating it. Now the thing is just there, and what's left is actually doing it. She picked up her fork. Which turns out to be what I wanted all along. I just had to fight through the proving to get to the doing. He nodded slowly. That's most of the first decade of building something, he said. You spend so much of it justifying the thing that by the time the justification is over, you've almost forgotten why you wanted it. Did you forget? He thought about it. For a while. The year before Lily was born, I was running on adrenaline, and I'd stopped asking whether I was actually happy or just moving fast enough that happy wasn't a question I needed to answer. He paused. Lily arriving slowed everything down, in a way I didn't ask for and didn't expect and absolutely needed. She saved you, Emily said, and then immediately, that's a lot of weight to put on a child. I know, he said. I don't think of it that way. She didn't save me. She gave me a reason to do the saving myself. There's a difference. She looked at him across the small table. You've thought about this a lot. I've had 7 years to think about it. Does it bother you? She asked. The years before. The version of yourself you were then. He was quiet for a moment. The honest kind of quiet. It bothers me that Lily's mother and I didn't figure out sooner that we wanted different things, he said finally. Not the marriage ending, that was right for both of us. But the years in the middle where we were both trying to make something work that wasn't working, and using the company as an excuse not to look at it directly. That bothers me. He picked up his glass. I don't let it dictate too much. But I don't pretend it's not there. She respected that. The not pretending. She had spent enough time around people who did the opposite, who sealed off the difficult parts of their history and walked around with these sealed compartments inside them, claiming to be fine, claiming to be over it, and periodically leaking in ways that surprised everyone except the people paying attention. Nathan didn't leak. He was honest about what he was carrying, which meant he was actually carrying it rather than dragging it behind him in denial. My father, she said, and then stopped. He waited. My father was not a bad man, she said. He was just not steady. And I spent a long time thinking that was a character failing of mine somehow, that if I were more worth staying for, he'd have stayed more. She said it flat and clear, the way you say things you've already processed enough that they don't detonate. I know that's not true. I've known it for years, but it's the kind of thing that shapes how you move through the world anyway, even when your brain has resolved it. It shapes how you decide what to trust, he said. Yes. She met his eyes, which is why I'm telling you, because I want you to know that when I'm careful, when I hold things back, when I need more evidence than most people would need before I believe something is real, that's where it comes from. It's not about you. It's about the thing I've been managing since I was 8 years old. He was very still. I'm telling you, she continued, because you told me about the boardroom and the ceiling tiles, and because whatever this is, I don't want it to run on the cleaned-up version. He set his fork down, looked at her with the directness she had come to understand was not aggression, but attention, the specific quality of a person who decides, with certain people, to actually be present. Okay, he said. Okay? Okay, I hear you. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. Okay, take whatever time you need to trust it. He paused. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not interested in rushing something that's worth building correctly. She looked at him for a moment. You're better at this than I expected. I've had 7 years to figure out what I kept getting wrong, he said. Being present and being patient are related. I'm still better at one than the other, but I'm working on it. Which one are you better at? Present, he said. Patience is harder. She almost smiled. I'm the reverse. I know. We'll balance out, she said. Yeah, he said. We will. They cleaned up together, which was not an event, just a thing that happened. She washed, he dried. They talked about a logistical question she'd been thinking about, which was what the practical shape of this looked like, given that his new role was technically on the other side of the city, and she was 3 weeks into an SVP position that was going to demand a lot of her time in the first quarter. I'm not asking you to restructure your life, he said, putting a glass away, just so that's clear. I wasn't worried you were. I know you weren't. I'm saying it anyway. He leaned against the counter. What I'd like is for us to be honest when something's complicated and figure it out from there, rather than managing each other's expectations in advance. She handed him the last plate. That's the exact right approach, and I want to note that it is also harder in practice than in theory. I know. We're both people with complicated schedules and a tendency toward independence and strong opinions about how things should go. I know. This will not always be easy, she said. Emily. He looked at her with a patience that she was filing away as evidence. I spent 2 years in conference rooms arguing with you about financial projections. I think I can handle complicated. She looked at him, looked at the drooped drawing on the refrigerator, looked at the slightly too dry succulent on the windowsill, looked at this man in his kitchen, drying dishes, steady and imperfect and real. Okay, she said. They moved to the couch after with the remains of the wine, and the evening settled into something quiet. Not the silence of two people who have run out of things to say, but the other kind, the kind that only exists between people who are comfortable enough not to fill every gap. At some point, he told her the full story of Sterling VC, the real beginning of it, the version with the doubt and the near failures and the specific year when he hadn't been sure it was going to survive. Not the Forbes version, the one he kept for rooms where the professional context was gone. She listened without interrupting. At the end, she said, "Did you know it was going to work?" "No," he said. "I knew I wasn't going to stop. That's different." She thought about that, about the difference between certainty and persistence, about all the years she'd spent not stopping, not because she'd known it would work out, but because stopping had never been a category she was willing to enter. "That's how I built everything too," she said. "I know," he said. "That's one of the first things I understood about you." She looked at him. "When?" "The Palmer account," he said. "The first meeting. You said give me the Palmer account, 90 days, and you had no idea whether it would work. You just knew you weren't going to stop until it did." She was quiet for a moment. "You gave me the account." "Of course I did." He said it simply, like it was obvious. I recognized the look. Outside, Chicago was doing what it did in January, cold and relentless and quietly beautiful in the way of cities that have made their peace with difficulty. The windows had gone dark against the night. The wine was almost finished. It was past 11 when she said she should go. She had a Sunday morning thing with Jasmine's brunch, long overdue, and she needed to actually sleep before it. He walked her to the door. She pulled on her coat, wound her scarf, found her keys. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah." "I want to meet Lily." He looked at her. Not surprised. She could see that the thought had been sitting with him, that he'd been turning it over, wondering how and when to introduce it without pushing or presuming. "When you're ready," she said quickly. "I'm not putting a timeline on it. I just want you to know that I'm not—" She searched for the right word. "Avoidant of that part. I know it matters. I know it changes things. And I'm not asking you to rush it. I just want you to know I'm not scared of it." He looked at her for a long moment. "She already knows about the crystal structure," he said. "She already knows about the crystal structure," Emily agreed. Something in his face, something held, something that had been held for a while, quietly let go. "Give me a couple of weeks," he said. "I want to do it right." "A couple weeks," she said. "That's fine." He kissed her at the door. Less cold this time, more certain, the kind that belonged to two people who had moved past the first one and were figuring out what came after. She went down the steps, and he stood in the doorway until she reached the sidewalk, and she looked back once, and he raised a hand, and she turned and walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment in the particular quiet of a good night ending. She thought about what Jasmine had said, that some things are worth the risk. She thought about the photograph in her bag, her mother at work, choosing her life. She thought about a woman who had worked double shifts and come home without putting it on anyone else, and raised a daughter who had learned, eventually, the same skill. She thought about the fact that choosing your life didn't mean it was easy. It meant it was yours. She started the car and drove home through the city. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, in February with the temperature sitting at 12 degrees, and Lily having declared that this was ideal expedition weather, Emily met her at the lakefront. She had not planned a speech. She had thought about it. She was a planner. It was ingrained. And then decided that you did not plan a first meeting with a 7-year-old because 7-year-olds were not interested in your plan. They were interested in whether you were actually present. Nathan had told Lily that Emily was a friend. Lily had asked which kind of friend. Nathan had said the important kind. Lily had accepted this with the equanimity of someone who had already factored it in. They stood at the water's edge, all three of them, in their winter coats. Lily had a notebook, an actual small notebook, spiral-bound, which she had brought specifically for field observations. She was looking at the ice formations where the shallow water had frozen in ridged layers, and her face had the expression Emily recognized from the photograph Nathan had texted from Michigan. Concentrated, certain, in the middle of something that mattered. "The layering is different here," Lily said, to no one in particular. "The lake gets choppy before it freezes, so the ice remembers the wave patterns." "That's actually a fascinating way to think about it," Emily said. Lily looked up at her. This was the first direct exchange. She had the large, steady eyes Nathan had described. His mother's eyes, he'd said. And she looked at Emily with the frank assessment of a child who had not yet learned that looking at people directly was considered impolite. "Dad said you know about data," Lily said. "I work with it a lot." "Observations are the first data," Lily said, "before the math." "That's exactly right," Emily said. Lily looked at her for another second, decided something, and held out the notebook. "You can write down what you see. I'm recording the pattern variations." Emily took the notebook. She was aware of Nathan, slightly behind them, doing the thing where he was very still and not intervening. She looked at the ice, looked at the notebook, wrote, "Ridged horizontal layering consistent with wave interference pattern at point of freezing. Variable depth suggests variable temperature at time of formation." She handed it back. Lily read it. Her eyebrows rose slightly. She looked at Emily. "That's good," she said, in the tone of someone who does not give this out easily. "Thank you," Emily said. Lily turned back to the ice, made her own notation. Then, without looking up, "Are you coming to Michigan in the summer?" Emily glanced at Nathan. He had his hands in his coat pockets and was looking out at the lake with the specific expression of a man who is trying not to smile. "I don't know yet," Emily said. "Maybe." "The tide pools are better in summer," Lily said. "Dad says maybe. He says maybe a lot." "He does," Emily agreed. "But sometimes maybe means yes," Lily said. "You can usually tell by whether he looks worried or not." Emily looked at Nathan again. He was not looking worried. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. They stayed at the lake for an hour and 20 minutes. Lily filled 4 pages of the notebook. Emily contributed 3 observations. Nathan walked alongside them and occasionally pointed at something in the ice and asked Lily a question that she answered with the focused authority of a 7-year-old in her domain. On the walk back to the car, Lily took Emily's hand, not as a declaration, not as a milestone, just the way children sometimes take the hand of a person they've decided they're comfortable with. Practical, unrehearsed, completely natural. Emily looked down at the small gloved hand in hers. She thought, this is real. Not cinematic, not the version she might have imagined with its clean arcs and resolved tensions and perfect framings. Just this. A cold Saturday in February, the lake behind them still and frozen, a child who had opinions about ice crystallization holding her hand, and a man walking on her other side who had once said, "I'm not in a hurry," and meant it. None of it had been simple. Not one piece of it. Not the 2 years of arguments and almost admissions and professional caution and personal protection. Not the 10 days of counting down and sidewalk conversations and cold hands and coffee shops where they'd finally said the true things out loud. Not the complicated, imperfect, real thing they were building now, with different offices and demanding schedules and a 7-year-old who had strong opinions and a mother's photograph in a laptop bag and a parking ticket that had finally been paid. None of it had been simple. All of it had been worth it. That was the thing, Emily thought, that she hadn't fully understood when she was 23 and alone in a Northwestern library at 2 a.m, building the version of herself that could survive whatever came. She had understood work. She had understood persistence. She had understood that you did not stop just because things were hard. She had not fully understood that the same principle applied to other people. That the ones worth having were not the easy ones. They were the ones who showed up as themselves, complicated and carrying things, and let you do the same. The ones who didn't ask you to be the cleaned-up version. The ones who counted ceiling tiles in boardrooms and never told anyone, and then, one day, told you. She had spent a long time protecting herself from the wrong things. She was done with that. Nathan looked over at her as they reached the parking lot, and she looked back, and something passed between them that had no name and didn't need one. "Lunch?" he said. "Lily picks," Emily said. Lily, who had been listening to this with the peripheral awareness of a child who misses very little, said, "Pizza." "Pizza," Emily confirmed. "I want the kind with the thick crust," Lily said. "The kind with the thick crust," Emily said. "Dad doesn't like the thick crust." Emily looked at Nathan. He looked at his daughter. "I'll survive." "He says that about a lot of things," Lily said confidentially to Emily. "I've noticed," Emily said. They drove to the pizza place, the kind with thick crust and too much cheese and booths with red vinyl seats that had seen better decades. Lily ordered for the table with the certainty of someone who had done this before and had strong opinions about the cheese-to-sauce ratio. Emily added a side salad, thought about the dressing situation, and ordered the dressing on the side. Nathan looked at her when she did this, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, and both of them were thinking about the exact same moment in his kitchen when she'd told him the salad had too much dressing, and he'd said, "You know, most people would just say everything was great," and she had said, "I'm not most people." She wasn't. She had never been. Lily ate her pizza and talked about tide pools and mentioned twice that her grandmother's brownstone had a very good garden for collecting specimens in summer. And by the third mention, Emily understood that this was not a tangent, but an invitation extended in the specific indirect way of a 7-year-old who was not quite ready to ask directly, but was making the door visible. "I'd like to see the garden sometime," Emily said. Lily looked at her pizza. It has worms, she said. Some people don't like that. I grew up with a fire escape garden, Emily said. We had worms. Lily looked up. Where? Columbus, Ohio. My grandmother grew tomatoes. Lily considered this. Were they good tomatoes? The best I've ever had. Lily nodded, gravely and with satisfaction, as though this answer had confirmed something she'd already suspected. Okay, she said, and went back to her pizza. Nathan reached across the table and refilled Emily's water glass without being asked. And she didn't comment on it, and he didn't make a thing of it, and that, the smallness of it, the ordinary care of it, was more than most of the larger gestures she'd received from other people in other chapters of her life. She thought about what she would tell her mother next time she called. She thought, I'm sure. The city moved around them, indifferent and full, doing what cities do, holding millions of separate lives in close proximity, most of them never touching. Occasionally, two of them finding each other in a conference room on the 14th floor and spending 2 years pretending not to. Outside the pizza place, the winter was still going strong. It would be months before the lake looked the way Lily wanted it to look for the tide pool expedition. Months before the city shed its gray and the windows opened and the long Chicago summer began doing its slow, generous work. There was time. They had time. And on a red vinyl booth in a too-warm pizza restaurant, with Lily drawing something in the margin of her field notebook, and Nathan reading her observation notes with an expression of genuine interest, and the thick crust pizza going fast, because it turned out even the people who said they didn't like thick crust came around eventually. Emily Harper sat and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was exactly where she had chosen to be. Not where she had survived to. Not where she had fought her way to. Where she had chosen. There was a difference. She had always known there was a difference. It had just taken her a while, and one very specific person who argued about financial projections and paid his parking tickets late and walked into rooms counting ceiling tiles and drove to Michigan in January for his daughter's field research, to finally arrive at the place where she could feel it. The pizza disappeared. The afternoon light went low and amber through the windows. Lily fell asleep in the back seat on the drive home, her field notebook still open in her lap, one gloved hand curled around her pencil. Nathan drove. Emily sat beside him with the city going past and the heat running and the quiet of an ending afternoon that wasn't really an ending. She likes you, Nathan said. I know, Emily said. That's not a small thing. I know that too. He kept his eyes on the road. She watched the city. They drove through the streets that had held all of this. The building, the conference rooms, the late evenings, the parking ticket, the coffee shop in Wicker Park, the sidewalk in Lincoln Park where his hands had been cold, and the city held none of it specifically, kept none of the receipts, offered no monument to the fact that something had changed inside it. That was fine. The monument was in the back seat, asleep, with a notebook full of field observations and a theory about tide pools that was probably correct. The monument was in two people who had spent 2 years being careful and had finally, slowly, by increments and honesty and the occasional cold-handed kiss on a sidewalk, chosen something different. Some things don't announce themselves. They just become true, quietly, over time, in the spaces between arguments and late evenings and sticky notes and small gestures of coffee carried across an office. And then one day you look up, and the thing is there, solid and imperfect and real, and you realize it has been there for a while. You just had to stop protecting yourself from it long enough to see.